Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Marketing, Management, and Money. I am your host, Ryan.
And I'm your host, Ryan.
This week, we are going to be talking about... Before I tell them what we're going to be talking about, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure. Let's hear it.
So, you do a lot of marketing.
Yeah. I try. I think I do.
Okay. When you do your marketing, is there any market medium that you just refuse to use? That you're like, worthless, garbage, never going to touch it?
Oh, man. Not off the top of my head. I mean, I think the marketing mediums you use obviously totally depend on the industry you're in, what your marketing goals are. I mean, there's a whole litany of different variables that play into that question, right?
Okay.
So,
okay.
I mean, I'm going to say no. I don't think that there would be a marketing medium that I'm never going to touch.
Okay. So what I want to talk about this week are any market mediums dead? Like, should we just abandon certain market mediums and say, hey, you know what? It worked 50 years ago, but today it's obsolete.
Right.
We no longer need to take advantage of that. And I want to dive in. I want to look at maybe some old marketing techniques.
Yeah.
And see how relevant that is for our listeners today.
You trapped me, and I didn't even realize it. As soon as you said that, I was like, okay, like, we're never going to use the telegraph again.
I don't. Are we? Let's dive into it. Let's find out. So, before we go too far, some listeners might not use the terminology market medium.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a good clarification. So what we're looking at here is how you reach your customers.
Right.
Which avenues do you use to reach your customers?
Mm-hmm.
It's easily confused with other catchphrases like touch points. There are subtle variations, but essentially what we're getting at here is what methods do you use to get your message across to your customers, whether that's email marketing, a social media campaign, a billboard, a newspaper ad, a radio ad, sidewalk chalk on the sidewalk, your storefront banner, all kinds of different things, right?
Mm-hmm. And I love how you used the term, what methods do you use, not what advertisements do you use.
Yeah.
Because there's a distinction here between market mediums and advertising.
Yes.
So on a market medium, now advertisements are market mediums.
Correct.
If I'm going to do a flyer, that is an advertisement. It's also a market medium.
Right.
But if I engage in maybe some one-on-one, training with my customer,
mm-hmm.
that's a market medium, but not necessarily an advertisement. And so when we're talking about market mediums, and I want to kind of bounce back to that example of a one-on-one with the customer. So customer calls in, they have a question about how to use your product.
Okay.
Do you take the time to answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's good business practice.
For sure.
And while you're answering that question, you're educating them, but you're also educating them. If you're doing good marketing, you're also educating them on other products or services that might complement what they have. And, you might throw in something like, hey, I'm glad that you purchased XYZ product from us, but have you ever thought about this accessory which goes to it? And so, you're marketing to them at the same time.
And that's the sales aspect of it, which is obviously what drives or adds to our cash flow and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But another piece of that is it's also showing them not only what our marketing culture is, what your company's marketing culture is, but it shows them so let me think about this for a second. So the love group that you appeal to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your group of core customers, as you do things like that, as you take time for them, it gives them further validation to align themselves with you, right? And so that's a huge part of these marketing mediums or your marketing strategies is to dial that in with your customer base.
Yeah, yeah. So can I share an example, a story that happened to me? This story cracks me up because this taught me a lot. when I was first getting into doing business consulting,
Okay.
and there's this point where, you've consulted with a couple dozen businesses and you start thinking, you're like, yeah, I know what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
And that's the point at which I was at, where I'm thinking, okay, I've got this. I figured out what I'm doing. I'm smart. And this was about...
Somebody roll out the red carpet. Here I come.
Yeah.
These words coming out of my mouth, you better write them down. They're amazing.
So this was about 10 years ago. And if you think back 10 years, smartphones are just really gaining in popularity about that time.
Right.
And digital marketing, a lot of the social media platforms are really starting to show that they are a viable marketing tool. So that's kind of the environment that we're in at this time.
Yeah.
I have this business. He comes in and he wants to meet with me, and he says, "Hey, I understand that you're pretty good at doing some business consulting. I'd like to get some ideas and bounce them off of you." Great, happy to. And so I asked him, I'm like, "What's your business?" And he was a commercial painter. And he says to me, he's like, "I'm trying to figure out how to market my business. I'm thinking about putting an ad in the phone book, and I'm thinking about running another ad in the newspaper."
Okay.
And I looked at him and I said, "Don't waste your money." I
Okay.
said, phone book is dead. Newspaper is dead. Everything's gone digital. You need to get online.
Right.
And he's like, "Okay, cool." And we talked about a couple other things, and the session ended, and he said thank you and went on his way. About 6 months later, I have the opportunity to bump into this guy again. And he comes into my office, and I ask him, I'm like, "Hey, how's business going?" And he's like, "Great." He's like, "I've actually hired 8 people since we last talked."
Wow.
I'm like, dang, 8 people in 6 months. That's great for just a small business starting out. And I'm like, "Okay, what did you do?" He said, "Well, I put an ad in the phone book and I ran an ad in the newspaper." And so I looked at him and I said, "You did everything I told you not to do, and it worked really well for you. Why are you here?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, no, I don't actually want to get any advice from you. I just need to get a number of a guy that you told me about." I'm like, "Oh, okay, here's his number." So anyway, the point of the story is it taught me that no market medium is dead. Even in this digital age, you can have great success running an ad in the phone book, running an ad in the newspaper.
Yeah, it totally depends on that type of who your best existing customer is, who you're trying to reach, and what their habits are, who they are as a person.
Yeah. So let's give our listeners some ideas.
Sure.
Let's go back. We're gonna, in this episode, we're gonna kind of ignore the whole digital marketing aspect. I know it gets a lot of hype, but I want to talk about some other successful marketing techniques.
Yeah.
And so, I'll let you lead off. Do you have any strategies that you've used that have worked really well that are outside of the digital scope?
For sure. Yeah. So I spent some time in Germany, and there I had an opportunity to see a little bit of a different style of marketing they use over there. And they put up a lot of posters, right? Probably, 18 inches by 3 feet sized posters. And they'll put them up for like concerts that are coming to town. Justin Bieber is going to be here, or, come to this club and check out this DJ, or this new movie is playing.
Right.
And so there are these big posters. And I was like, that's really weird that they have these giant posters. And, in the back of my mind, I'm like, why not go online? Like, their customer base, you think about people who are going to movies and clubs and concerts and all that, you would intuitively think that that's going to be a younger base. But obviously, there's some reason for them for doing it, because they're all over the place, right? Subway stations, train stops, all kinds of different places. And then you look at back in like the, 1920s, 1950s era, they have kind of a similar thing going on where they're creating these big posters for, whether it's a new actress or movie or whatever, or, hey, this is America and I want you got to come to war, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's interesting how that marketing medium has evolved through the ages and still isn't dead.
Mm-hmm.
Even in this digital age, something that existed and was effective back in the day, as my kids would say. Well, my kids refer to last week as the olden days, but the olden days.
To them it was.
Yeah, exactly. So in the olden days, they use this marketing medium and it was effective. And still today, you're seeing those same kinds of things. Yeah, they're printed on a LaserJet whatever printer, but they're still providing the same effective kinds of marketing.
Yeah. So it's interesting as you're talking about that. A lot of times getting out of that digital space can distinguish you because the digital space has gotten crowded.
For sure.
I had an opportunity about a month ago. I was talking with a sales group that they're a regional sales group, and I was kind of asking them, hey, what are some different strategies that you're using? What's working? What's not working?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I found really interesting was they told me, they said, we went to a traditional mailer and we put a sample product in the mail and we just mailed it out.
Okay.
And they said, we're actually seeing great success with this.
Really?
Yeah, that was my response. I'm like,
interesting.
Okay. And so I asked them, I'm like, why is it that you feel like you're getting, such great success? And they said, because people don't get that anymore. They used to get that, and they used to be bombarded by that.
Yeah.
And
that's...
And they said people don't get that anymore. It's a little bit of a throwback. The nostalgia of it is very appealing, and he admitted, he said, I think we've got a window. Like it's not going to be novel forever.
Yeah.
And so, but in the moment, it's working really well for them, and they're like, yeah, it's not that expensive to do. Relative to digital marketing, it's really not that expensive. Everyone perceives digital marketing as, the more affordable way to go. And I'm like, digital marketing is quite expensive, actually. All forms of marketing tend to be very expensive.
Right.
And so they're just mailing some samples out, getting great response, and, is working really, really well for them.
Yeah. And I feel like my first thought was, so when was the last time that you opened, I'm going to call it junk mail, a piece of junk mail that you were like super excited to dive into? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, hey, this airline's offering me 0% APR on my,
right.
Like it just doesn't happen anymore, right?
So I had that same thought. And when I asked this sales team, I said, okay, how is it that you guys are finding success with this? Because don't you just get lost in all of the junk mail? And he told me, he said, it's not that we're just sending a letter out there. Yeah, it's not junk mail. It was a little bit of a package.
Yeah.
It was big enough to catch the interest.
Right.
Because, you get envelopes all the time and you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, this is junk. But no, this one, it had a little bit of size to it. And so it sparked people's curiosity.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, I'm going to open this. And they opened it and they received a free sample.
Yeah.
And so what it was the fact that they still did something to stand out, to distinguish themselves from the crowd, because marketing is crowded. No matter what medium you're going to use, marketing is crowded.
Absolutely.
And they needed a way to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great approach. It's like I had the thought of back when I was a kid, diving into a cereal box, and the toy was actually in the freaking cereal.
Oh yeah,
like what the heck?
You don't like today you have to download the toy out of the cereal box. I'm like, come on.
You cut out the cardboard box and fill out this paper and include 17 UPCs and your grandmother's birth certificate and samples of her hair, and you send it in, and 19 weeks later you get a letter back that, and it just goes on. Like,
I just want to know, why do you have samples of your grandmother's hair?
I don't know. It's a that's really weird. I said that jokingly, but honestly, I think that, you brought that up, and I was like, you know what? I think I actually do have samples of my grandma's hair, because there's these things. You know what? I'm going to look it up right now.
Speaking of mediums that are never dead.
I know, right? It's like a, oh man, how do you describe it? It's like a mason jar with like all kinds of memorabilia from my great grandmother's life, right? And so it's like a photo of her when she was young.
A lock of the hair.
A locket. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So it's not like I'm some freaking creepy sociopath serial killer that's
I don't
keeping
think that this
samples
absconds
of
you from being a creepy sociopath, but this activity is somewhat normal.
It was worth a shot.
Perfect. But yeah, so getting back to this marketing thing.
Yeah.
It's the whole idea of, how do you stand out? How can you stand out from all the noise?
And that's such what we're talking about here is such a powerful piece of marketing, I feel like, because as technology advances, as new ways of reaching our audiences arrive into our world, the majority of advertisers and marketers and companies are going to go after these. The iPod comes out, and all of a sudden now we have things like, so we're downloading device or music and putting them onto devices, and then things like Spotify come out, and these different music streaming services and advertisements find a way into that. All kinds of different things like that. But if we can kind of flip the script on that, as people move into the new areas, they're moving away from the older areas, and that's another way to stand out as well, right? Not just by mastering what is new and upcoming, but also continuing to utilize what is effective from past marketing as well.
And so I want to touch on one more aspect of this before we wrap up for today.
Yeah.
And that is, technology changes, but human behavior stays relatively the same.
Absolutely.
We still want the same kinds of things. We just have different ways of going about getting it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have music streaming services now, and we make our own playlists, whereas, 20 years ago we had mixtapes.
Right. And before that, you had to make your own music, and so people would sing and whistle, and so the needs have not really changed. It's the way that we go about it. And that goes to this argument that no market medium is dead, because if that market medium still meets a need of your customer, whether it does it with high tech or low tech, it's still meeting a need of the customer.
Yeah. So like your one client, if you're still, advertising in the yellow pages, or if you're still using direct mailers, if that's effective for you, if that effectively reaches your customer base, then who cares if you're using the latest and greatest? Like, don't be deflated if you're not always up on the latest and greatest, because that's not always necessarily what's best for you and your company, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, how many deals are still done with just a good old-fashioned handshake?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Word of mouth promise.
Right.
Handshake.
Yep.
Let's just get this done. And so, the takeaway that I would say today is just, as you guys are trying to think of different ways to connect with your customer, go ahead and use the digital. Go ahead and use the technology. It's smart. It's a great way to go. But don't ignore a lot of the other opportunities that you have, that, things that have been tried and true, things that have worked in the past will work still.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's not as crowded of a space. It's a space you can get into. You can find some, blue ocean, as a lot of times you'll hear in business.
Yeah.
And you can really work with it and run with it.
Yeah, I think it's super important to always be aware of the unique needs of your business and your customer base. And as you address those in the appropriate ways, not necessarily trying to force certain things on your business or on your customer base, that's where you really find the magic of marketing.
Yeah.
So absolutely, by all means, take a look at what's worked in the past in marketing, in your industry, in other industries. You might get inspiration for things that have worked and you're not doing anymore, and that can drive business forward for you in 2020 and beyond. So with that, thanks for listening in, and we'll catch you next week on Marketing Management and Money.
Take care.